my problems are the same as most people's in the pandemic, and then
Yeah,
lots of people have far worse and in addition.
for
So
sure,
so
for sure.
for the most part, like I've been okay, and then some parts of it have been kind of a welcome break from the madness of life, which I think is all, I think a lot of people have found that. A lot of people have found the time reflective too, which I think is healthy. People have been
Yeah.
able to take this time and think about if they want to, change up their lives, their careers, their situation, their location, and that's been kind of an amazing. A lot of people have reset,
Hmm.
their notion of what's important. So
Yeah. Do you
that's
feel
good.
like it's shifted your priorities in any way?
Um, Only in so much as um it really just sort of underlined what I was already doing. I have young kids. My kids are 8 and 5 and 2, and I was sort of moving away from really not wanting to be away from them and be out of town as much, and then being able to be home with them for the last year kind of just triple underlined that for me, and trying to figure
Yeah.
out how to build a business that means I don't have to travel for long periods of time as much. I think travel will always be part of my life, and I'm happy and welcome for it,
Yeah.
but not having to like move to a different state for 6 months and be away from my children, I think is
Yeah.
was made more evident.
Do you have the answer to that? The secret answer to how you create that? Asking
Partners.
for myself.
I think the truth is, I think partners. I think partnerships. There's I've been working with I have a producer that works with me, um
Sam.
and yeah, Sam, who I basically said to her when she started working for me, like, look, part of the expectation is, and part of what she wanted to do is, I was like, you're going to be more hands-on when things are physically shooting, and you and I need to be kind of interchangeable in that way. And lots of people love the idea of being on set. Like, it's one of the reasons why they want to produce, and I found a way to be very actively involved and still fully overseeing and making something happen without necessarily having to be there every day. And it's not easy, and it really depends on the filmmaker, but I think the answer is
Mhm.
like real producing partners that are capable and creative and able to step in when you're not there, and that you jointly share the work. So for me, I think that's really the only thing I've that's really the only answer I've come up with so far.
Yeah. No, that's a good one. I think it's an important note. I think oftentimes when we're coming up, there isn't that emphasis on partnership. There is this sort of like lone wolf. You're out there, you're your own soldier, and you're in battle, so to speak, on your own. Yet everybody's like isolated in their own bubbles, especially in the indie space. And I think there's been a big transition in the past 5 years at least that's I feel it in the past 5 years of like you said, really leaning in on other producers and creating community and
Yeah.
realizing that we can all be resources for each other. And I think honestly, the Me Too movement was a big part of like rewriting that narrative, especially for women, that we can lean on each other and support each other. There is room for all of us, and that scarcity mentality is an unfortunate way
Yeah.
that sort of the women who came before us had to grow up believing that, and
Yeah.
it's now up to us to take the baton and redefine how we're going to do things. And so I think it's incredible to hear you say that, because I have a few projects on my slate, and I'll say the one project where I do have a producing partner, it's like night and day, between that and the
Yeah.
ones where I'm sort of alone, just banging my head up against the wall and being like, I love this, right? This is what I
Yeah.
chose to do.
No, for sure. It's also partnerships outside, producing is so hard. I mean, you basically work for free for a long time, sometimes years, I mean,
Yeah.
and even some of like my favorite movies, if you like talk to the producers about their journey getting there, they're like years in the making. And the amount of times we've heard those stories, it's always so hard to push that boulder up the hill. And when you're doing it by yourself, having somebody to motivate you, having somebody to bounce ideas off, just quite frankly, having somebody to share in the misery and then the joy
Yeah.
is I've always loved working with other people, and I don't really like it when I'm on my own. It's a lonely place to be as a producer, I think, when you're on your
Yeah.
own.
Yeah, I am figuring that out. I've been sort of came up as a physical producer mostly.
Mm-hmm.
Although I think the first project that kind of lit the fire for me for producing was this documentary called Autism in Love. That opened up a lot of doors, and I was like the only producer on that. Capital P, did everything, didn't know what I was doing, and I thought, oh, this is producing all the time, and realized that I wanted to gain experience on sets and learn from other producers who had, so many more years ahead of me, and then sort of got swept in the sort of production wave of being a UPM line producer, which I've loved, and it served me well. But to your point, like, priorities shift, and there comes a point where you have to take inventory of your life. And like, I don't want to be the producer, right, in 10 years who's got to be on set for 16-hour days. Like, I want to be able to bring on people that I love and trust, younger people that have the energy for it and are excited. Not that I'm not excited, but there's just a different energy like that shifts. And so having come up on the physical side and now making this shift to more of a creative producing role, and stepping into many of these projects as a lone producer, like, I've definitely, especially last year, I will say that for us, unfortunate as the pandemic was, obviously, for the world, but for our industry, I welcomed the pause and the permission that I couldn't go do production to sort of really focus on these projects. And like you said, take stock of what is important. It is getting on the other side of that now, not that we're on the other side of the pandemic, but it is like an awakening, to your point of like, how does one sustain this energetically, spiritually, financially to get there and get to the level of success that, I look at like your career and say, wow, when I grow up, I want to be like Lynette, and clearly you've had to endure and have the stamina for over 20 years for our business, for the research I've done on you. And so I always feel extremely honored and grateful when I get to like share a Zoom with, with producers like yourself, who I, not just me, but many admire so much. In fact, a special shout out to my assistant, Rebecca, who was like dying and was like, oh my God, I love her. Please tell her I love her. So
that's awesome.
I'm passing on that message to
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think, we're just dove right into it. And I love when conversations organically, when they just start like that. Take us back to the beginning a little bit of how you stumbled upon this crazy world of producing.
Well, I did stumble into it, sort of. If you're lucky, if early on you can sort of identify things that you're drawn to and that you're good at, and then you can make active decisions, that your schooling choices reflect that. So I was always a person that wrote stories. Like, I was always a storyteller. I was always deeply creative. I grew up with a lot of siblings, and we were always putting on plays and shows, and creating fairgrounds in our backyard and out of clothes and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I came from a family of, like, my siblings were all very deeply creative. They were musicians, and so we were sort of like very performance based. But I used to write a lot as a kid. I was always coming up with different stories, and my imagination kind of ran wild, and I was an avid reader and would just like sit and devour book after book after book. And so, then in school, naturally, my kind of the subjects I like leaned into were English and drama and music, and so then as I kind of like narrowed my field, I sort of narrowed it down to the stuff that I liked and the stuff that I was good at, and then eventually, when it came time to go to university, I was sort of really stuck with this choice of like, kind of this big decision on what I wanted to do. And I'd been part of a theater company as an actor. I'd done dance and I'd done theater, but I really, really, I cannot sing. Like, I'm not talented, and I just don't have a voice. But I always loved musical theater, and it was like the most devastating thing of my life that I wasn't born with the gift of song. But I always like loved music, and I leaned into dance. So I auditioned for this drama school that was relatively new at the time in the UK, that Paul McCartney had opened. And it was his old boys school, and he turned it into like a state-of-the-art, really small performing arts school. And I auditioned for the acting course there, but part of it was a musical theater course. And so I had to sing in my audition. Of course, I tanked. And they were very kind and very sweet. But I had put down as my second choice, because I really wanted to go to this school, like the management business degree. And the way that that school worked, it was all practical, and the degree was like 1 degree and it was crossed. And so if you did the management side, that was only 60% of your degree, and the other 40% was dance and performance. And so your major was one thing, but then you got to minor, and then you really got to cross over into working with the other classes. As part of my like final year project, I had to produce a show that the actors were in, that musicians performed in, that the technologists did the sound and the lighting. And so it was an incredible school. And so I ended up going and doing that instead. Like, it was sort of like one of those like moments of just like life changing, like, oh my God, thank God that happened to me. And it was really because somebody looked at my application and said, well, everything that she's written in here, it's almost like she wants to be a producer. She just doesn't know it and is sort of like seduced by acting.
Interesting.
And that was true. Like, I think at the time I was sort of seduced by the idea of acting, but I'm so much more suited to producing. So I ended up doing that, which was incredible. And then that was where I really found my groove of, oh, I want to be in like some sort of production. But I didn't really know what that meant, like sort of coming out of that school. And so I went to London and I worked as an assistant for an agent, and I did a lot of free work experience when I first got out of school. And I really come from like no money. Like, it's not like I paid my way through college, and I slept on friends' couches in London. And and I was an usher at a theater at night, and I worked at a bar in the day, and I even had a paper round one night a week. I had 3 jobs just to pay my way in London. I was just staying on friends' couches, and I did work experience for free, working for a casting director and an agent, and kind of just got to understand the business in London and the entertainment industry in London. And I really liked working for the agent, and I loved working in casting, but I realized that what I really wanted was sort of something that was more all encompassing. Like, I didn't just want to be confined to one area of the business. And like, I wanted to be involved in the casting, but I also wanted to be involved in the physical product. I wanted to be involved in all of it. And so I talked to the casting director who had hired me, who's still one of my dearest friends. And I said, I really want to kind of work for a producer in theater. And he said, well, funnily enough, somebody's putting on a show and they need an assistant, and let me call him. And then the next day I went for an interview and got this job as this producer's assistant on this sort of big West End musical. And it was an incredible experience. And I really got to see what it took to take a musical from its sort of inception all the way through opening night and then beyond. And it was financed by an American company. So I was the main sort of point of contact for them coming into town and liaising with the director, and theater is very small. Like this, if you work for the producer, it's like the producer, you, and really no one else. And so I got to do so much, and I was really tenacious and just like threw myself into that show and made friends with the director, made friends with the writers, made friends with the cast, like was there every single night for every performance, was at every rehearsal, just like immersed myself in it and really learned about theater. And so by the time that show was finished, the company that had financed the show, that were American, offered me a job in their theater division of their company to sort of oversee and work on the musicals that they were financing and producing in London and New York, and for me to go and try to find around the country new musicals for them to produce and invest in and transfer to Broadway or to the West End, which was an insane job.
Yeah, and also a huge shift from where you had been. I mean, you were in your early 20s at this point?
22. Yeah, I was 22.
So you're 22, yeah. You're an assistant for this fancy schmancy producer in London. How long do you do that job before destiny comes calling, really?
I mean, the truth is, these things are, it's luck. It is just right place, right time. It really is. And I was very, very lucky that this particular show was financed by this particular people. And also my boss had been doing this for a long, long time, and he was happy to let me run with stuff. He was happy for me to be like, hey, we need an opening night party, I'm just going to plan it. He's like, great, there's your budget, go do it. Like he was so like gracious at just like letting me run with stuff. And so then in the eyes of the financiers, I was this like 22-year-old, like, who could get anything done because I had nothing to lose. So it was an amazing opportunity, and so I moved here. I moved to
But how
LA.
did you feel at that time that you were ready to take such a leap? Was there a part of you that was like, oh shit, like I'm being handed the reins to something really massive, I could fuck this up? Like, did that come up for you?
I had gone through a very personally difficult year. My brother had been killed the same year, in a car accident, and it had sort of really shaken my foundation as a person. Um, and coming out of that, I really felt like that sense of like, you really just have to live your life. And when you're 22, you don't have any real responsibility except to yourself, and you have this sense of, well, this horrible thing has just happened and I'm surviving it. So like, so what if I suck at this job? Like, is it really gonna, what's the worst that can happen? It just was this, it was like, it sort of removed that fear for me for a big period of time. And that was sort of it was a gift to me, kind of emotionally. Even though obviously it was really hard, but I was also like really looking for something completely different in my life. I needed to be in a different space, in a different place. And
Yeah.
so I was definitely intimidated by the job, but I also was very fearless. And part of that was youth, like just youth, like, this,
Yeah.
I mean, when you're in your, if there was ever a time to just take a chance and just say yes to stuff that sounds interesting, like in your 20s, like just do it. And I that was really a motto of mine for a lot of my career, was say yes, was just, it may not be perfect. And I've seen other people in my orbit who sort of have like a career plan and a career path, and they have turned down opportunities or said no to stuff because they're kind of waiting for the right thing. And I just don't know that exists. I sort of feel like for me, if something felt like it could take me another step further, or if I was going to learn something, or if it was a new experience and it was something I was excited about, I never had, and I still don't have like a path. It's not like I'm like, I have to get to this place. I just never had that. And it was about, what's the thing I want to do next that's exciting. And sometimes that just came up, and then I would say yes to it. And so I said yes to this. I said yes to this opportunity. It wasn't a hard thing to say yes to. I relocated to Los Angeles. I mean, I'm from Liverpool, England. I mean, it's like, and I was living on people's couches in London, and I was broke and working 3 jobs. And suddenly I'm like, wait, I can be in Beverly Hills. Which is, you know what I mean? I remember driving down like palm tree lined streets and just thinking, this is insane. Like, this is insane that I'm here. And I still get that feeling when I drive up, past the Beverly Hills Hotel. I still sort of remember that feeling of magic of being in the city. But it was an amazing opportunity. And I also felt really safe, because the people that were offering me the job, it was a couple. They had 5 children. Their oldest is the same age as me. And I felt like I was coming into a family, and I really was brought into a family. Like, it was a job, but I lived in their house for a year while I got settled and found an apartment, and I traveled with them everywhere. And so I didn't feel like I was being just dropped in a place I didn't know. Everyone that worked at the company was just really wonderful. And I had a friend from college that had moved to LA completely coincidentally, like 6 months earlier. And so I would like hang out, and then she'd already made like a group of friends, and I kind of jumped into her friendship groups. And suddenly I had like a young group of friends that I was out with, and I was on the Sunset Strip every weekend. And it was kind of it was magical. It was magical. And it was a great way to kind of just like come to LA and do it in a way that was, I wasn't struggling. I was really in this amazing job, and I did that job for 3 years. I really worked in finding musicals, and worked on their shows in New York, and worked on their shows in London, and like oversaw their shows and developed projects for them. And eventually the company did both film and television. And I was the only real person on the theater side. And I was in LA, and I was kind of like starting to see that there was this film business and this television business and wanting to be part of it. And, growing up in Liverpool and like, film degrees when I went to college, there just weren't that many of them. Like film studies was more like film history. There just weren't film schools in the same way. And it was really, if you wanted to go into the arts, you were really going into theater. Right. And really you were going into acting. I mean, my degree at the time was the only one like it in the country. It was the only one that was like a business degree that was focused on the entertainment industry and was practical, and you learned how to produce, but it was still in the theater and music scene. It had nothing to do with film and television. So moving to LA, I suddenly was exposed to a whole new world, and was really excited by that world, and felt like, oh wait, maybe I could be a film producer. And I thought, okay, well, how am I gonna do that? And so I went to my boss and I was like, look, I really want to like work on the film side of the company. And she, she'd invested a lot of time in me on the theater side, and they were full on the film side. And they had like tons of people who had experience in film, and I had zero experience. And so, she was encouraging on me kind of like joining some of that stuff, but I couldn't really lead it. I had this other job. And then I really realized that, the thing that I have then sort of stuck to since, which is that I really am entrepreneurial, and I want to run my own business. I want to do what I want to do, and I want to do things the way I want to do them, and I want to work on projects that I want to do. And so I sort of felt like, okay, well, if I want to go work in film, I could basically quit my job and I could go start to PA. Because I don't have any other skills. Like I don't know how to line produce. I mean, I don't know what to do. And I was like, or I could raise money, because I have been working for a high net worth individual who finances musicals. And I had been around a lot of other high net worth individuals who finance the arts. And I was like, well, maybe some of them might want to finance a movie, and maybe
I love that your options were either I'll really go PA. It's just amazing, right? Like either I'll PA or I'll just talk to all these really rich people and see if they want to give me money to make some cool art.
That's kind of still my options. Like, I mean, the truth is, like, if I couldn't be a producer, I have no skill sets in between. Like, I couldn't do anything else.
I doubt
I would either be PAing or I couldn't do anything else.
I doubt that. Research too. I know you could do more than that.
I don't know about that. So I basically gave in my notice, and I said, I'm gonna start a company and I'm gonna be a producer. And I think my boss was like, you're out of your mind. But she was very supportive, and has still been very supportive, and one of my biggest champions to date. And I'm so grateful for them for giving me the opportunity. I wouldn't be here without them and their faith in me when I had nothing to offer anybody, except enthusiasm. And I did that. I raised money, set up a production company, and I went out with a partner who was a financing partner, and the two of us set up a business, and we went out to finance independent film. And I had no idea what the hell that meant or what I was doing. The year I launched my business, I went to Sundance and like slept on people's couches and watched movies and went to Q&As and I basically spent a year kind of going to a bunch of Q&As and listening to podcasts and listening to other producers and like learning how other people did it, and realized that there was no one way to do it. And that there was, that there was tons of filmmakers, writer directors that needed producers. And if you had access to money and an ability to help get something made, that was kind of the way in. And so I did just that. I basically went out to like I met filmmakers at festivals. At the festival, had a lawyer introduce me to an agent. I just was kind of scrapping around, seeing who I could. And I read scripts for 6 months, and I had an investor that was willing to spend money. So I could have, within month 1, put money into a movie and been producing. But I really knew that I kind of had 1 or 2 shots at picking the right thing. And that whatever it was that I decided to invest my investors' money into, that it had to work. And so I ended up making 2 movies after reading scripts for 6 months back to back. The first was Half Nelson. And the second was Stephanie DALEY. And I learned how to produce by producing those movies. I knew nothing. I had produced one short film, which is where I learned what a grip was, because I didn't even know what a grip was.
Yeah.
And I, and I learned that craft service can't just be candy bars and chips.
Yep.
You know, and then I was so lucky. I invested in Half Nelson on behalf of this financier, and I basically said to the other producer, I'm only going to invest like half the money if I can actively be part of making this happen. Like, I want to be creatively involved. I want to be on set. I want to be in pre-production meetings. Like, I want to be there, and I want to be there through post, and I want to understand. And the other investor was 100% open to that. And then we had an experienced producer who brought an experienced line producer onto the movie. But the rest of us were like babies. It was the start of most of our careers on that movie. And so I learned how to produce by watching. And a lot of the skills are not that dissimilar to producing a musical, not
Right.
I mean, it's working with artists, and there's such an incredibly collaborative nature to theater that if you're trained in theater, you're used to figuring out how to get people to work together. And I've been producing plays since I was in college. Like, I've been producing all sorts of I ran a small theater company when I was in college that we would tour around doing shows in schools. So I knew how to be a producer, and like applying that skill set to film was just learning a slightly different language,
Right.
and learning that medium. But the actual skills they're all kind of the same. It's communication, it's people, it's organization, it's instinct, it's storytelling. It's just about understanding the mediums. So that's how I started. I mean, that's really how I got into it. And both of those movies went to Sundance the following year. Half Nelson had an incredible run, and Stephanie Daley had a theatrical release and won the screenplay award at the festival. And it was just suddenly like I had these two movies at the festival at the same time. And then I got on the Variety 10 producers to watch list, and then it just got a little easier for me and then people were sending me scripts. And
Right.
Very, very early on, I was sort of known as a producer that would come on to first time feature directors' movies and like really work with them and support them and raise money for them. And that was how I spent like a good chunk of the first many years of my career, was really doing that.
Incredible. Like, wow, just took us to school there. Amazing. I want to talk a little bit about taste, right? And choosing the right projects. Like, how, one would think that you have had to have read a certain quantity of scripts to know what a good story is, and all of this sort of narrative that we are led to believe, right? But you clearly, like you said, could have just said yes to anything. You wanted to get your sea legs under you. You wanted to go, but you knew you had to wait for something special. And I've read that even till today, I wonder if this was the same for you back then, but you just didn't have the language for it, that for you, it's all about character. You don't care so much about the plot or even the genre. It's just, what is the character? Who is this person? What do they want? And so many people ask, right? Like, what do producers want? Like, what's your taste? Like, how do you find stuff? So I guess it's a backhanded way of asking that question, but like, how do you trust, like, what is that thing, to trust that instinct that this is the thing for you?
I think, well, first of all, I think that the great thing about taste is that we all have a different version of it. And I don't think anybody is right or wrong. I mean, there are, you and I could watch the same movie and I could think it's a masterpiece and you could think it's absolute garbage. And I'm not sure that either one of us is right or wrong. I think that, you know what I mean? I think that that's the beautiful thing about art, and about the entertainment industry. And I feel like if anyone ever forgets that piece, then their ego has gotten the better of them, and they've gotten way too big for their britches, that they feel like their taste is somehow superior to other people's taste just because it's not the same. So I think that I sort of start with, we're all consumers. We've grown up consuming content. We've grown up consuming books and art and poetry and movies and television shows and theater. And, even from a child, we know what it is that we like and don't like. Like, we know what shows we want to watch on a Saturday morning and which ones we just find like boring. And I think, you're developing your sense of taste based on what speaks to you, what is appealing to you. And so when I first started, I think my taste was developed with it really came from, I like to read a script without having anyone pitch it to me. I don't want to know where it's going. My first reaction to something is my reaction as an audience member, my reaction as a consumer, and I trust that. But I've learned to trust that because it's worked for me. It's not like I knew to trust that in the beginning. I could have made a few movies and they could have bombed, and I have made movies that haven't worked, but I'm really proud of everything I've made. And the truth is, the ones that I instinctually felt like weren't going to be great because the scripts I didn't think were great, but I made for other reasons, I was usually right about. So I think, first of all, taste is about you as a consumer. People ask me if I would ever do like a horror movie. And, my response is, well, I don't consume horror movies. I don't consume Paranormal Activity because I'm a baby and they're scary to me. So I don't really know how to read them because I don't really like to watch them. But like something like The Others, which is like supernatural and smart, like you could put that in that genre, but that's like character driven and inside a really smart premise, and like that's also scary as hell, but like it's different. And so I think sometimes the genre, saying I don't really care about the genre is really that, it's about what I know how to contribute to creatively as a producer, which I think is really important. I don't ever want to be the kind of producer that's just logistical, that just figures out how to make stuff happen. I think what drives me is a creative collaboration with everybody that's part of the show or the movie. And that's why I'm in this business and not, in any other non-entertainment based business where, quite frankly, my skills, your skills would be completely applicable. Human resources, finance, business. It would, it's like I feel like you and I could go work in a number of different industries, but why do you choose entertainment? Well, because there's a creative drive and a need to tell stories and want to be part of that collaboration.
And I think too, the power, right, to get to be at the helm of choosing which stories get told and then get passed down to inspire and inform perspectives on culture and identity. We, like you said, we get so much of that from the images we see, and it is a responsibility. And I think, there's no better time to be a female in Hollywood. And so I feel like we kind of just, not that it's cush by any means, but it definitely feels like there's that we're riding the beginnings of that wave that I hope doesn't, crash.
Yeah, I totally agree. Agree. When I think about what it is that I want to make, so the first thing is, do I like it? Do I have an emotional response to the material, which is the most important? And then following on from that, do I know how to get it made? Like, do I have a sense of the journey and what I can contribute? And that has changed over the years. And, if somebody had given me Lord of the Rings, when I was 25, I wouldn't have known I wouldn't have known how to get that made. I had no experience, but like Hoff Nelson with first time directors, with an under $1 million budget, I knew the path. I could see the path, like how I could be part of that. And that still kind of applies, a little less so now, but a lot of the movies I did early on were smaller in budget because that's what I had access to. That's how I knew how to get those movies made. I could stay in control of those movies in terms of the way that they were, the environment created for the filmmaker to do their best work. And so I think that was a huge part of it. And then a lot of the times I look at who the most of the time I look at who the filmmaker is. A lot of my early work was very writer director driven. So I used to get stuff in script form where it was often a director who, was making the movie that they had written, and I was there to support that and figure out how to enable that vision. And so then it was, well, do I believe in this person? Do I think that they can execute it? Do I think that they know what they're doing? And some of that's just, gut. Some of it was chance in the beginning. I could never have predicted that Ryan and Anna would be the filmmaking force that they are. I'd love to be like, oh, I was so smart that like I made their first movie because I had some sort of like insight into them. I didn't. I read that script, and it, their short film had won had won Sundance the year before. They were really intelligent on the phone. I loved the material. The budget was right. It had gone through the screenwriter's lab. It had all these elements that I was like, this feels like a smart bet on top of me really loving the script. So it wasn't just that I loved the script. All the elements felt it was there. And so I think it's about that too. Often it's about, sort of those things coming together. I can't tell you how many times I watch a movie and I think, God, I could never have made that movie. Like, I wouldn't know how to contribute to that movie, but I love the experience of it. And, it's funny, like there's a great example of this. I've mentored for the Sundance Producers Lab for many, many, many years. And it's one of my favorite things to do. And one year, Beast of the Southern Wild came through the lab. It was in the director's lab, it was in the producer's lab. And the four of us that were mentors were all very experienced. And that script came to all of us, and the producers had never made anything before, and they were super scrappy. And I remember all of the four of us kind of met beforehand, and we were like, God, this one's tough. Like, this one's tough. Like, this reads like a $30 million movie. Like, and we were all kind of scratching our heads on like, how does this get made? Like, how? We just couldn't quite see it. Like, it was really hard for all of us to see it. The producers, like, totally saw it. They totally knew what was inside Ben Zeitlin's head. They had a plan. They knew exactly how to execute it. And the four of us were kind of like, okay. Like, I remember feeling like, this feels like something I don't know how to do. At that point, I'd made like 6 or 7 movies, or maybe more, maybe like eight or 9 movies. And so, when they were talking about it's non-union, we're just going to shoot with real people, like in a real place. Like, and I was like, this is insane, guys. And they're like, no, we're going to put like fake antlers on pigs. And I was like, it's going to look terrible. And I couldn't get my head around it. And Paul Mazzei, who's one of the mentors, was like, kind of felt the same way, but like was really excited to kind of explore it. And I was just like, I don't know. I don't know how to make this movie. And then I saw the movie and I was so blown away. And it really cemented to me what I thought, which was, sometimes it takes a certain kind of producer at a certain place in their career to be able to do a certain kind of movie. And like, I just didn't see it. All I saw were physical production problems, insurance issues. Like, I don't know how you make this for this budget. Like, I just saw a bunch of problems because I'd made too many movies by that point. And that movie would never have gotten made if it wasn't for the group of producers and where they were at in their career at that particular time they made that movie. And that has nothing to do with taste. It also has to do with just an understanding of what the job is, and then being prepared to do it in whatever way is necessary to get the movie made. I couldn't see that. They could see it. I was supposed to be their mentor, and they went and been nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards. And like, it was so impressive to me, an incredible lesson in how movies can get made in any number of ways. And that producers are like deeply creative in how they go about making those movies.
That's an incredible story. I think it's so true that we all often think as we rise, like there's one, like you said, there's one answer or one way to do everything. But I think it's true that this sort of energy that you have, and honestly, the ignorance, which is bliss sometimes, right? As to how hard something is early on in your career, like you have to really hold on to that for dear life, because you're going to get to the other side at some point and you'll be like, ugh, like you said, I can't see it, or I can't do it, or I don't have the like hours left of my life, of my bandwidth to do this like I did it in my 20s or in earlier parts of your career. So I think that's super important. And you touch upon mentorship, which I really want to dive in with you. I know I've been guilty of having this maybe like romantic notion of what a mentor is. And so I'd love for you to touch on the realities of like what mentorship has looked like for you coming up. And when you are mentoring people, what does that actually look like? Like, how engaged, how active, how transparent?
I know it's funny. Like, I've worked for one company. And that was, from 22 to 25, like, because I feel like I had like, and most of my mentors are men. I don't, except for the woman that brought me here, who really supported me and took a chance on me, and that was sort of a slightly different situation. But, once I left and I was in the film world, I never really had mentors in the way that I think people see it, but I've certainly been given a lot of opportunity. And I think that there are definitely people who have put immense trust in me when they had no reason to. And that is sort of a slightly different version of it for me. And
Hmm.
I had a business partner, my first business partner who I started my company with, who you know, put an immense amount of trust in me with my like idea for a business plan based on no experience except just kind of gut that like, you know what, let's make a few movies, see if they go to Sundance, like let's try to build a business this way. And that trust in me, um as opposed to mentorship, which was, you know, which was somebody, I think in some ways, like I see it as somebody teaching me and showing me how to do my job. Like I really learned how to do my job from doing it and working with other producers, watching them do it, not necessarily them teaching me just
Right.
being around and paying attention. And so, but I think because I didn't have that active mentorship in such a way, I definitely want to be, I have definitely strived to be that. But I also feel like I have learned so much through that process. I mean, Sundance is an incredible program, and I have been, again, for like 50, I guess 12 years, I have been a part of the Sundance Labs, and I have learned just as much from the advisors that I sit in the sessions with, to the outside speakers they bring in, to Michelle Satter and her incredible team who run those labs. And so none of them are necessarily mentors, but they are peers who I continue to learn from. And I feel that way about the producing community. You know, I've been a member of the Academy for 7 years, and I've sat on the executive committee for 6 of them. And that's an incredible group of established producers who are very open and honest in that environment. And I've learned so much from incredibly experienced producers that have been around longer than me, like Jennifer Todd or Kathy Kennedy or Dee Dee Gardner, and just,
Yeah.
you know, remarkable Stephanie Elaine, like remarkable women
Yeah.
that I have watched and asked questions of and talked to about their careers. You know, because producing is lonely, you don't, I mean, I had never worked for somebody. And so, you know, now I find it to be incredibly important to be transparent with younger producers about the challenges, but also be encouraging about the fact that there is no one way of doing anything, and that everyone can really find their own path and find their own way and be creative. And you know, I have all women that work for me, and I have a very open policy at my company in terms of I want everybody's creative opinion and really want it, and everybody to read all of the scripts that come in and give feedback and be part of meetings and get to know filmmakers. You learn by watching, you learn by doing, you learn by participating. And so for me, mentorship is also giving people the authority to take risks, both in expressing their voice, and then just being part of experiences. And that to me, mentorship looks like that, and not being afraid to ask questions and not being afraid to be wrong, um, and really not being afraid to have an opinion. I think that's because your opinion as a producer, I think, is so important when it comes to script notes, when it comes to material, when it comes to, you know, crewing, talent, casting. I mean, all of it, marketing materials, a poster design. I think like having some faith in your opinion and that your taste and your voice has value, even if like I routinely disagree with people that work for me, that doesn't mean I'm right and it doesn't mean they're wrong. To me, like mentorship is that. It's encouraging people to not be afraid of their voice and then giving them a safe space to continue to grow and push themselves.
And it feels like, so much of producing is honing in on like your voice, and the sort of like that is the cornerstone of what are the stories that compel you, right, to do this insanely difficult and challenging and demanding work to get it out there. And it feels to me, from an outsider looking in, right, to your story, that looking back, you can probably connect the dots and see how like your voice was kind of there from the beginning, because from Half Nelson to Wonder Darkly, like there's a lot of similarities between the kinds of stories you're drawn to, right? And so how do you recommend producers or any artists really, because I don't separate producers from artists. I think we are also filmmakers and artists in our own rights. But how do you find that? How do you find your voice, especially in a market now where it's so crowded and there's so much, right? It's wonderful what the internet has done and what the streamers have given us and what social media has given us. But I often wonder if it creates too much noise where you can't really take the time to find yourself in that. In fact, it's the opposite. I wonder if people are losing themselves, but I'm also like a generation, that knew life before the internet. So I don't know how like 20-year-olds are dealing with life, having always had this kind of stimulus. And so what guidance you would give for that?
I think say yes to things that feel authentic. And trust what it is that you like. I mean, I if there's an opportunity or script or, I again, like I go back to what I said earlier, which is I've never had a career plan. Like I may have had like ambition, like, oh my God, it'd be so great to win an Oscar one day, but that's not a plan. That's just a ambition. It's also, I mean, now in my experience, it's actually not something to work towards, because really what you should be working towards is like daily fulfillment and like an enjoyment of the work that you do. And if at some point that yielded a gold statue, well, that's just kind of icing on a cake, because it's really just not about that, so I have said yes to things that I didn't know what was going to come from them, but I instinctually felt like this is an experience I want to have. I mean, and then from every experience, I've taken something kind of remarkable. It's, I mean, when I was at Sundance, one of the projects that went through the lab was the small movie called On the Ice that was a native director from Alaska, and his short was exquisite and had also won Sundance, and the script came through, and he wanted to make it with all native actors in Barrow, where he's from, so all non-actors, and it was a wonderful script, and he was incredibly talented, and it was absolutely the kind of film I wasn't trying to get made anymore. I was like, it's $1 million movie. I'm really trying to make slightly bigger films at that point in my career, but I was so drawn to it, and I was so drawn to him. And at the time, I didn't know what it was that really drew me to it, but what really drew me to it was that I felt like I haven't seen this before. Like I haven't seen, and now it's, and I mean, in retrospect, you're like, well, you haven't seen it because people aren't making enough content with Native Americans and contemporary and especially contemporary content with Native Americans. And so, but at the time I just was like, yes, like, there's something about this that feels really fresh, really original, and a voice, and I want to tap into that. And then in retrospect, I was like, wow, that was amazing. I got this incredible experience with this culture that I never would have seen. And I got to make a movie and live in this place that I never would have gone. And I got to experience all this insane, eye-opening stuff that's like stayed with me and carried, sort of carried me through. And like, that was just, I just said yes to something that felt fresh and felt like I hadn't seen it, and it felt like I could be useful to, and I really loved the story, and it had all these amazing outcomes. And I feel like that has happened on many of my movies and many experiences, is that I said yes to something in my gut, and then it's amazing the doors that it opened and the pathways and I really feel that way. I got to make Captain Fantastic because I met Matt Ross and helped him make his $200,000 first feature. And then because of that, and we had a good time, he gave me his next script, which was incredible. And I never would have gotten that if I hadn't said yes to 28 Hotel Rooms. And so I think it's about saying yes. And then somehow you find yourself 20 years later, having had a career.
I mean, and what a career you've built. This idea of sustaining a career in this business, especially as a woman, this idea of having the bandwidth, the stamina to stay with it, right? And one of the reasons I started this podcast is because I grew resentful of the fact that aside from some Q&As, aside from some press on some movies, there's no place where you can go and just have producers talk about the real shit of what it means to do this work. And so you see somebody at the Oscars, you see them getting all the accolades, the 1% of this business that, like you said, is completely out of your control. And I resent that some people look at that and make that their goal, or then perceive your life or your journey to have been whatever they think because of that. And so part of this mission is to like capture our stories and really shine a light on the realities and the challenges, because not to dissuade anybody, but to inform them. So when they bump up against this in their own lives, like you said, they can feel, okay, others who've come before me have felt this. This is normal. This is just a part of the growth, right? So in your career, when you have dealt with challenges, roadblocks, maybe moments, I don't know if you had this, I certainly have had in my career moments where I almost left the business and was like, burn it all to the ground. Like, I'll go work in HR. I'll go find something else I can do with these skills, because it can be emotionally depleting. And as producers, we have to be so many things for so many different people. So it's a two-parter question. It's, how have you navigated these times in your life, these lulls, which are inevitable? And then when you are filling your energetic spiritual well to keep you going, how do you do all of that?
I routinely and this year, last year, the year before that, have had moments, many moments, and sometimes periods of weeks where I'm like, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to keep doing this? Should I really do this? And it fluctuates. Some days I have a good day and people say yes to 3 things in a row, and I'm like, great, forward momentum. And then the next day, like, 2 people will pass on a project that I've spent 6 months working on, and you feel like, oh my God, I just spent 6 months on something that like is dead. Like, and I don't know how to and I've got to revive it again. Like, I think it is very, very hard. I think one of the things that makes independent producing so hard, that is so underappreciated, that there are 2 other sides of there are two other jobs in this business that experience this, and it is writing and directing, where you are not necessarily compensated for your time, and until so much later on, and writers who write on spec, that have to sit in a room for hours on end with no one paying them until they get to a certain point, but then once they hit a certain point, they start to get paid for their work. Directors often are attached to a project and they don't get paid until the thing goes into pre-production, but they're part of it. Producers can work for years and years without a single dollar. And then they get to negotiate their deal and inevitably get the most squeezed, sort of like the most diluted. We have no protection from unions. It's all about leverage. No one represents us in the same way. And suddenly you're like, but wait, I've worked for 5 years on this. I put all these things together, and now you want me to get paid the same as my location manager is getting paid, like for 5 years of work, and I'm going to be on this every day, and then I'm still going to be on this 2 years later. And I think that is a vastly underappreciated side of this business that almost no one else can totally understand and grasp. Like, people don't. I mean, the reason why I think the Academy is so protective, and why producers that are creative producers are so protective over like line producers, for example, is that line producers get paid for the work that they do. Creative producers can just spend years without getting paid. And it's really, that can be very challenging. I think it can be very demoralizing.
Yeah.
You're constantly being strategic. You're constantly trying to have to reinvent the wheel. You're constantly trying to make something sound fresh and new, and it's really hard, and it can be very lonely, and it can be very exhausting. And I have, and I have struggled with that my entire career. And I think that if you ask any producer, they will say the same thing. Like, anybody that works independently struggles with that. And I work a lot. I work more than most, but I struggle with it. And then anybody that, that I talk to has the same feeling. And even if you're in a deal, even if you, like, it's still just, it's hard. It's hard to get up every day and do that. So I
I think what keeps you going is, for me, is having other things as well. You know, I mean, I have kids, I have my husband, I have family, friends, you know, travel, you know, I mean, I'd like to say I have hobbies, but I'm not really sure I have hobbies. You know, when I have a really tough week, I'll sit on the floor with my 2-year-old and I'll just like build blocks with her. And it's super simple. And it reminds me that it's all okay and that she doesn't care if I got an actor to say yes or no today. And that has been really remarkable for me. Or I take my dog for a walk and or I go for a swim, or like, you know, whatever it is, it's just about, for me, like not having it be the center of my universe. But when things fall apart, like I can be devastated. I mean, I've also said this to my husband a lot, that, and he's so used to me now, been together for a long time. And, you know, like if something I've been working on, if somebody fell off something, I have to grieve it. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's okay to grieve it. Like, it's okay to be like, God, I was working on this thing for 6 months and it's all I did. And then this other thing happened. And now my actor's going to go do this other movie. And now my movie's not happening. And God, what a waste of all that time. And like, I should have been doing something else. And now I'm 6 months further away from making something. And I think it's okay to also just take a minute to grieve when that happens, because it happens constantly, and then pick yourself up and move forward. And that's been my motto, is like, allow yourself to be emotional. It's okay to be emotional. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be frustrated. And then you like get through it, and then you pick yourself up when you start again. And so I've had, like, that's been my career, and it's a roller coaster. It's an exhausting roller coaster. And there is no roadmap for producers. There is no, this is how you do it. And unlike writers or unlike directors, you know, you can be successful, but like, you're still back to the drawing board the next day on a movie that you have to figure out how you're going to get made. And unless you want to go take a job, you know, where you get paid for that effort. But and so the part of that is the risk of being let down and then feeling like you've wasted your time. And hopefully you have enough success that, because when it works and it's great, it's worth all of it. You know, the highs are so high that they make up for the lows.
Right. And the lows are so low, and it's like constantly trying to find that middle and like existing, like you said, between the two planes, where it can never be just purely amazing or pure shit. Like, it has to kind of exist in the middle. And I think you're right. Like, it is important to have other areas of your life that are developed, whatever they may be. For some people, it's family, you know, that you like this idea of being defined by this business and being defined by what you do, what you don't do. Because even, I mean, as someone who's gotten to the levels you have, I'm sure, you know, you are nominated for an Academy Award and they're like, great, what's next for you? And you're like, oh, can I just like enjoy that? You know, like, can I just take a minute? And so it's such an industry of like, what's the next thing that I think it can sort of train us improperly to not take like a minute to pause and reflect on how much we've done. And honestly, to like your point, enjoy the journey. And I have definitely struggled to not let the business define me and my self-worth as like a human, as a woman, as just like a person trying to navigate this world. Have you ever struggled with that?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. I mean, I think, you know, the lesson that I also tell myself constantly is not to compare myself to other people. You know, I think I love to be inspired by other producers who I admire. And then I'm like, I call them up and I'm like, so just tell me how you did it. Like, tell me what you did. And then you kind of uncover, because like people feel like they're like superhuman, because you sort of look at your life and you're like, oh, I'm a mess. Like I missed my kid's bedtime tonight and I didn't do this. And like my office is a disaster and I haven't filed my taxes. And like, you know what I mean? And you're just like, you're sort of like, God, how does everyone else do it? And look at all these people that are doing it so much better than I am. And then you talk to somebody and then they're like, yeah, I have 4 nannies. And like, that's how I can, and you're just like, oh, okay. Like, it's just, you start to just like, everyone has stuff. Like, it's
right.
Nobody's got it figured out. Like, nobody has it figured out. Everybody has stuff. And I think that I definitely have fallen into the trap over the years and definitely do it a lot less now of like the comparison of feeling like, well, how did that person get? I mean, I used to look at Christine Vachon, I still do, and I'm like, how does she make 5 movies a year? Like, I don't understand it. And like,
yeah.
And I'm like, but I'm inspired by it now, whereas I used to be like, threatened is the wrong word, but like intimidated by it. Like I was like, God, like how does she figure it out? And I'm like, she's brilliant. Like, and she's got relationships and like, you know, but everybody has stuff that they're not doing in lieu of doing, you know, whatever it is. And I think that the mistake you can make is comparing like opportunities people have been given, or, you know, situations they found themselves in, and relationships that they've stumbled across. But yes, but frequently I think people feel like they're fraudulent. They feel,
Yeah.
you know, I'm always, you know, they feel like, I mean, you know, again, like I think the more you work and the more you work, and as the older I've gotten, I feel less like that. But I also feel the lack of security. I mean, you know, it's you know, I was, you know, so the joke of like, well, I could either produce or PA, but the truth is that if it got hard to produce, like I really would have to reinvent, like, so what am I going to do now with my life and my career? How am I going to earn money if I couldn't produce, or I just really didn't want to anymore? And
Yeah.
you know, I think it's that there's always that fear of that kind of sneaking up on you. And you know, but I don't know. I feel sort of more zen about that idea now, and that just sort of having a little bit more confidence and faith that you have a skill set as a producer, you have a skill set that people, especially now, I mean, in the last 10 years, I think people have really come to respect producers in a different way than they had even when I started. When I started out, I was fighting to be respected. Now the amount of people that call me and say, we need a producer on this, we need an actual producer that can put this together, like those calls weren't really being made 15 years ago. It was sort of like, it was seen of like as like creative baggage. And then you know, I think Sundance was a big part of, because they really influenced a generation of filmmakers in teaching directors, like you really need a creative partner, that like you need somebody that's going to help you get this movie made that also is creatively in tune with you, because you want somebody putting your movie together who has the same vision as you and is going to protect your vision, so that when you have to make some hard logistical choices, you know that they're on your side and that you're towards the same end goal. And that was something that Sundance did that was kind of amazing, by creating the creative producing initiative, and then it reshaped an industry, reshaped the way agents saw producing, the way managers saw producing, the way studio executives saw producing, and it became less about just like setting up a movie and walking away. It became about the individuals it really took to get the thing made. And so, you know, I think that there's always going to be a need for that, especially with like a sort of a glut of content. People are looking for great producers all the time, and that didn't exist as much. I think when I started, it didn't exist as much.
Yeah. I feel optimistic, that's for sure. I feel like I snuck in at the right time to be like on a good path, you know, alongside, like you said, people who do understand the value and truly want like those partners. And it's like you said, the finding the right marriage of creativity is typically the hardest part. And when people are like, I just need a producer, it's like, no, you don't just need a producer. You need to find the right producer for you. You have done so much. I hope you recognize that. Not that you need me telling you that, but sometimes I think I have learned in doing so many of these that we producers get in our own ways and tend to not see like how far we've come, you know. And I hope you take the time to reflect on that if you haven't recently, and how much of an inspiration you are to many. And so I know you don't have a career plan, but is there one thing still that you're like, I would love to do this once? And what would that thing be?
You know, I think that the natural evolution for me at some point will probably be to direct. You know, doing the Oscars was incredibly creative, because because producing that show is creatively overseeing that show. It's not, it's a logistical job, but it's primarily a creative job. And so that was the first time the creative decisions were mine and Stephanie's, and it as opposed to enabling someone else's creative vision. Because even in my most sort of deeply collaborative relationships with filmmakers and with directors, there's still I'm still there to service their vision. I mean, again, like I can give creative feedback and commentary on cuts, but it's all in service of what they're trying to do, not what I think it should be. And I've always produced that way. But you know, I feel like at a certain point, I will have my own stories to tell that will be driven by me. But it's not something that I feel a sense of urgency on, you know, because I love producing and I love what I do, and I love the filmmakers I work with, and I love the collaboration. So it's sort of something that I think, because again, like I think when I do ultimately direct, I'm gonna do it I will do it probably infrequently, and it will be very specific. And which is the opposite of how I produce. I sort of feel like I've tried my hand at a lot of different kinds of genre and storytelling, and will continue to do that, and even more so. And I'm excited to do that as a producer. But I feel like as a director, I'm more likely to be much more specific in what I would want to do. And so, who knows?
Well, fantastic. I mean, whatever it is, I know I'll be anxiously watching from the sidelines and rooting you on. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your life.
Having me. This has been a pleasure. Nice to talk to you. Get to know you.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much for sharing with me and the listeners.